Hello, everyone. This is a very special episode of Superannuated Starman. Back in episode 17, I had a 17.5 where I had an opportunity to interview Gary Winnick, one of the developers for Maniac Mansion. Going forward with the podcast, there's people that I really want to talk to, but due to scheduling, we can't always get everyone involved. So I might do an extra little 0.5 episode, and this is going to be one of those. So episode 25 of Superannuated Starman is Pokemon Yellow. And today with me, I have Jonathan Rivera, and he's going to be talking to us about his memories and his replay of Pokemon Yellow. And it's not going to follow the format that the main show does. We're not going to go over a history of the game. We're not going to talk about development. We're going to keep our stories very brief. And this is mostly just going to be a general discussion. And going forward, I'm hoping that people that maybe couldn't get a chance to talk to me at that time will be able to come forward and we can just do a little 0.5. That way we can all experience these games the way we want to. Anyhow, John, how are you doing today?
Oh, man, I'm doing great. I know we've been talking about wanting to do a couple episodes, and I'm definitely excited to talk about Pokemon because I am a Pokemon nerd.
And I don't really have much memories or really any experience playing Pokemon other than the last couple of years. And for those of you listening, you know that this year we are wanting to capture games that came out in 1998 and 1993. And fortunately, Pokemon Yellow is just one of those games that came out in 1998. But again, we're not going to go into history and all that. So, John, what are some of your memories of Pokemon Yellow?
So I guess, when we're talking about Pokemon Yellow, we're just talking about early Pokemon days. And, I know you said you're not super into it, like you didn't start off big into it. And I think it's definitely probably has to do with your age. Because even I've got to admit, because I'm a little younger than you, that I was even a little old for the Pokemon thing. Like, I know that, when I was coming into it, I was like, man, this kind of ain't for a lot of kids. But I played them all. I loved Pokemon Blue, Pokemon Red. And when Yellow came out, I thought it was so cool because, it was like, wow, they're, nailing, the show. Because when you played the original Red and Blue, all the pictures of the Pokemon looked a little weird. It was kind of a little ugly, fat Pikachu. All the Team Rocket's characters were generic characters. But now you hop into Pokemon Yellow and it was like, man, this is cool. There's Giovanni from, the leader of Team Rocket. There's Jesse and James. There's Gary. There's, and they're nailing the characters. So even though, of course, it's just a ripoff of Red and Blue, it's almost 98% the same game. I was super excited that it was more akin to the show.
How old were you at this time? So 1998, I was in 8th grade.
So 1998, I was born in 85. Would that make me 13?
Okay, so you're just a couple years younger. So you would have been in 5th, maybe 6th grade. What was the playground scene like for this game, or was there even one?
Sure, no. The big thing, in addition to the game, because one of the cool things about the game is, for those who don't know, is they introduced the concept of the link cable. So you had your Game Boy, everybody was playing the game on their own, but one of the big innovations with Pokemon is you had this link cable and you could trade each other's Pokemon. So every game came just short of the 151. It's like, oh, you got this game? Yeah, you can get 138 of these Pokemon in red and 138 in blue and 132 in yellow. So it required you to trade, required you to trade to evolve, trade to get them all, and obviously the battling thing. So between the link cable, the trading, and the battling, and then also the Pokemon card game, it was really popular. And I remember having the cards, trading the cards, never learning how to play the game, just trading the cards, whichever one looked cooler. But yeah, it was pretty big back then.
Let me get this right. You could actually battle people over the link cable, or was it exclusively for trading?
Okay, and I'd have to double check. Eventually, games had. I didn't check if this generation had it. Because, when I'm talking about Pokemon, obviously a lot of it blends together. But yes.
For sure.
Link cable, with the link cable, you could battle each other. Maybe that started in Gold and Silver. I don't know off the top of my head. But for sure, you could use the link cable to battle and to trade. Yeah.
So another question I have, with Pokemon Yellow, that was a Game Boy Color game.
Yeah, I think it was Game Boy Color in America, but it was rushed out early in Japan, so they released it, I believe,
Yes.
on the original Game Boy.
But my question for you is, what color was your Game Boy Color?
Oh man, I think I want to say it was like one of those clear purple ones.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was like that kind of like semi-translucent where you could see the motherboard in there. Yeah.
Yeah, that was such a thing of the 90s. And I kind of wish they'd bring it back because you had landlines that looked like that.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of early desktop computers that was the kind of space age look to them. And I really
Yeah,
enjoyed
Nintendo
that.
did a lot. Yeah, Nintendo did that a lot. The clear plastic.
Yeah, that translucent look like you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So playing this game when you were younger, and I'm trying to kind of formulate what I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to ask here. Did you find this to be a difficult or challenging game? And what kind of resources did you have when you got stuck? Because I've got some complaints of this game when it comes to how many quality of life improvements have been made in these later
Oh, sure.
generations.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you, in this playthrough, that's one of the things I was noticing huge was like, oh my God, like you can't do this in this game. You can't do that. I mean, like, I didn't even know that they had a limitation on items. I remember I was playing at one point and I went to pick up a TM, which is a move for a Pokemon. And I was like, oh, you don't have enough space to pick it up. And in the future games, that's never an issue. But yeah, difficulty. I would say for most of the game, it's a pretty smooth ride. The biggest issue is occasionally there's a gym leader that's got that one Pokemon that's a little over level that has that one move that really just nails you. And then of course the Elite Four, because when you get to the Elite Four, you're dealing with four, Pokemon trainers in a row, all really, the best of the best Pokemon. And on top of that, like you don't really get a break to go to the Pokemon Center. So you got to go in there with a lot of, your potions, your revives, and go in there and hope you come out the other side. Okay.
And it's really more than four, and not
Because the
to,
champion.
yeah,
Yeah.
you have the champion.
Spoiler
And
alerts.
yeah, I don't want to spoil the end boss. We'll talk about that when we do cover our main show. But this game, were you able to beat it when you were younger?
I was. I mean, as a kid, I pretty much beat every generation. And I'd say for at least the first 3 generations, I was able to get every single Pokemon. And, obviously getting things like Mew, which is like almost unobtainable in the game, you'd have to get through like events and trades and everything like that. But now, my goodness, like, there's alternate forms and special evolutions, and it's crazy.
Speaking of Mew, what kind of rumors did you hear about how you had to obtain him? The steps that you had to go through in order to get him? Because one popular one that even I knew about, and I didn't even play Pokemon,
Under the truck.
was using strength on the truck, and
Yeah,
that's where Mew was.
I actually didn't hear about that back then. I heard that much later, that you could push the truck. There actually is a way to get Mew in Pokemon Red, Blue, Yellow, without a cheating device that involves just manipulating the program code.
Yes. So there's actually like 3 different ways, and it kind of boils down to the various. Are they trainers? Is that just the random people in the world?
Trainers,
Are they all trainers?
Yeah.
So it boils down to
NPCs.
NPCs. That's probably the better word for it from my perspective.
Mhm.
You have to battle them in very specific orders. And if you've already battled them, then you can no longer get Mew through that specific route.
Battle them in orders. Sometimes you have to like step into a certain position and then pause at the right time, fly. Yeah, there's all kinds of different things that essentially, and I'm not a programmer enough to understand it, but you're putting the game's programming in a certain state where it forces these really weird situations. I know there's one where you can get a a level 100, well, a Nidoking that you can make level 100 by just leveling it up once. And then, yeah, there's a couple ways to get Mew and all kinds of different like little tricks, but they're all like really complicated and you have to be really careful. I mean, like, one misstep or mistiming and you mess it up.
I know I'm asking a lot, thinking all the way back to 1988, that time frame. But
Mhm.
do you remember any rumors from other kids that were playing the games about, oh, I got an XYZ Pokemon that, looking back, you're like, that didn't exist.
I don't remember that in that game. What I do remember, no, you know what? The one exception I do remember is when the second generation was close to coming out and the movie was around the time, there was the big rumor about Blue. Have you ever heard that?
Blue? No, I'm not familiar with it.
I'm sorry, Blue.
No, I don't know what that is.
so so essentially Meryl, which is a little blue Pokemon with a blue ball on the end of its tail. Like, I guess early art came out for it, somehow got leaked from Japan, and people thought started nicknaming him. I don't know how the nickname started, but they called him Peekaboo, and we're saying he was like I don't know, an alternate evolution to Pikachu, or if he was related to Pikachu. But it became a rumor that Peekaboo was somehow ascertainable in the old games as one of the new Pokemon that was coming out. Because back then, we didn't know they were going to add more Pokemon. It was just like, oh, this is cool game 151. And then all of a sudden, the movie was coming out, and there was like 4 Pokemon just in the commercial. They're like, who is that? I don't know who that is. I don't know who that is. And so that Peekaboo character, I remember it was being rumored to have been in the original game somehow. I don't remember any directions on how to do it, but I do remember kind of hearing about that.
Rumors back in the day were just insane. And a lot of those are coming from like gaming magazines like Game Informer, EGM, exactly. And were perpetuated by them.
Yeah.
Getting back to Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
So this game, did you played Red and Blue, or just Red or just Blue?
I'm sure I played both of them. As I got older, I my personal way of choosing which game to choose was always to choose the one that I thought was inferior. Because the way I figured is, if I choose the inferior one, then I will have the rarer ones for trading. So if I looked at Red and Blue today, if it came out, I'd be like, oh, everybody's going to want one with Charizard on the cover. Who wants Squirtle on the cover? So I would be like, I'm going to choose the Squirtle cover. Oh, you're all about Squirtle, right?
Oh, no, I'm all about Charizard. I would never pick Squirtle over Charizard, but that's a really interesting way of doing it.
Yeah. So gold and silver all the way. Ruby and diamond, I'm going with Ruby. I'm going to go with the thing that I think that in an impulse purchase, you're going to go for the quintessential good one. And I'm going to go for the inferior one because I figure now that makes my Pokemon just a teeny bit rarer.
I've got one more question before we kind of wrap up this segment and start moving on to our playthrough of today. Do you remember what your team was back then, or any highlights that you're like, I always have to have?
Oh, of course,
a Nidoking, or I always have to have a Pikachu. I don't even know if Pikachu was in Red and Blue. He was in Red and Blue, right?
He was. He's a little harder to get. I think you can get him in Viridian City. I'm sorry, Viridian Forest in Red and Blue, but he's like a 5% drop. So you can get him. He's just one of those ones that you got to like run through a lot to get him. Yeah. But ones that I absolutely always had is, man, I love me some Gengar. Gengar, that's the ghost Pokemon, Ghastly Haunter Gengar. Especially Gen 1, ghosts were immune to fighting attacks. They were immune to normal attacks. They tend to be pretty strong against a lot of different things. They could put Pokemon to sleep. Therefore, they were good for catching, rare Pokemon. And he just looked cool. He just looked like this little evil goblin. And I was like, yes, that is my guy. So Gengar was huge. Obviously, once you got Mewtwo, he was a permanent fixture. I remember having Pidgeot only because, Pidgey's one of the first one you get. And like after a while, you're like, oh, this is a pretty decent, decent Pokemon to start with. And then, of course, your starter. Your starter is always, if you're not running with your starter by the end of the game, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, so a definite lack of loyalty.
Yeah.
I don't really have any memories of this game. I never played the original Pokemon games
Mhm.
until years and years later. And it wasn't until just recently that I have ever played through the entirety of one of the early Pokemon games.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have anything else, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about playing through Pokemon Yellow today.
Sounds good.
So like I said earlier, due to some scheduling conflicts, John wasn't able to make it with us on the regular show, but I had asked him before to go ahead and, if he would, play through Pokemon Yellow so that we could go ahead and discuss it. And he's gone all the way through the game. And so we're going to take some time to talk about what it's like to replay through a game that he played in 1998. So John, the first question I have for you is, what did you name your character?
What did I name my character? Ash, of course, man. If you're gonna play Pokemon Yellow, you gotta have an Ash. You gotta have a Gary.
I named my character Red.
Oh, okay. You're going old school. Gotcha.
I didn't really know what to name him,
Hmm.
but I'm always that guy that I want the canon name for my characters.
Yeah,
So when
and
I'm
Red, I
playing
would say, is
games like,
definitely Ken. Go ahead.
I definitely agree that Red is there.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, the mistake I made was that I used lowercase letters as well,
Ooh,
not knowing that everything is basically done in all caps.
sure, yeah.
So it looked a little janky, but is what it is.
I did the
Oh,
same thing with my Pokemon nicknames.
oh, you nickname them.
Well, we're gonna talk about the fact that I kind of played the game in a special way
Oh
that
yeah.
almost requires it.
Okay, so go ahead, just dive right into that. And what do you mean a special way?
Well, I'm going to start off by breaking your heart, and if you want to get into post and add some boo sounds, I did not manage to beat the game in this recent playthrough, and the
Oh, you didn't?
reason
I thought you
is
did.
no, I went into it and I was like, Pokemon Yellow is a cake. If I'm gonna do this for Sean, I'm gonna push this to the edge, and so I decided to try to do a Nuzlocke challenge. And so Nuzlocke challenge is essentially a very difficult version of the playthrough that adds some constraints. And although I played it, it definitely slowed down my progress. And I'd say I got a good 60% of the way through the game. But man, it's pretty killer. And I figured that's what one of the things I could talk about is what that Nuzlocke challenge is and kind of why it made it so hard.
Yeah, so go ahead if you would and explain some of the rules. And if you don't recall them all, I've got it pulled up right here on the
Hmm.
Bulbapedia.
Well, okay, so there's really only, I believe, two rules that are like 100% the Nuzlocke challenge. And that is whenever you can only catch the very first Pokemon you run into in each area. So you go to Route 1, you run through some grass, and a Pidgey comes out. You have one opportunity to catch that Pidgey. If he faints, if he runs away, that's it. You cannot catch another Pokemon for that area. It is done. You cannot go for the second one. You can fight as many as you want, but you only have one chance, and that's the first chance to catch the first one per area. So you walk into the ghost area, that first chance is it. You walk into Route 2, anything like that. And yeah, that's one thing. So several times, I messed it up because either I really didn't want the Pokemon, because after a while you're like, wow, I've got like 9 Pidgeys and 8 Rattatas, or you accidentally knock out the first one trying to catch it. And the second rule, and this is the one that pretty much makes the game ridiculously hard, is if a Pokemon faints, you consider that a dead Pokemon and you release him from your game. And so that makes the game very, very hard.
Yeah, so I'm looking at those two basic rules, and that's pretty much it right there.
Mm-hmm.
Any Pokemon that faints is considered dead and must be released.
Exactly. Yeah, no revives, nothing like that. No going to the Pokemon Center. That Pokemon is done. So, I mean, just imagine, playing through the game with, that Gengar that I love at level 40. And then, unfortunately, he gets hit with something pretty hard, or maybe he gets poisoned and you're in the middle of a cave and you don't have enough potions to keep him alive on the way back to that Pokemon Center. Maybe you don't have the escape routes. It makes you have to, like, really prep for things and like take those things into consideration. But one of the other rules that I like that's kind of popular is you should nickname all your Pokemon, and the idea is kind of like to make you feel like you had a closer bond, because instead of just like it's a generic Pikachu, no, that's not Pikachu, that's Shocker. Like Shocker's been with me for forever.
I like it.
Yeah, yeah.
How far were you able to get following these rules of Nuzlocke challenge?
Well, I had to reset my playthrough about 5 times before I was like, well, I'm giving up on rule number 2. Because, the first time I did it, man, I actually like went down even before I fought the first gym leader. I had my Pikachu. I caught one Pidgey. And I got to a slightly strong Pokemon that knocked out my Pidgey. I was just left with the one Pikachu, and then I ended up getting knocked out. Then I got a little bit further, and each time I'd maybe lose a good Pokemon, but I'm like, all right, got to grind out this next one, build them up, But then you start losing those core members of your team, and there's only so much you can do with a Pikachu and 9 Raditas, or 5 Raditas.
Yeah, I could definitely see why that would be incredibly difficult.
Yeah. I think I ultimately got to Sabrina and beating Sabrina. That is where I was able to get to my playthrough. But to be honest, that was after I had decided I am not going to release these Pokemon. I still followed the one catch rule, so I wasn't running around with all the cool Pokemon and like the good ones you want. So I had a lot of generic characters that you probably wouldn't normally compose your team, but I for sure was not going to release them because there was time constraints were crazy, because I was like, man, if I want to beat this game, I'm going to have to run through it, cheating. So I felt bad.
That's still incredibly impressive because Sabrina is the 6th gym leader.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and honestly, I mean, I didn't have a huge amount of time to do this. I mean, I think you gave me about a week or so to like do this, and obviously with work. But I was trying, and I thought I'd be able to do the Nuzlocke challenge, and it let me down, or I let myself down.
Well, at no point am I trying to like force you to play these games. This is just something that I wanted to experience with you. And it definitely was not my decision for you to do the Nuzlocke challenge. I'm glad you did, because it really adds another dynamic that I'm sure Chris and Corey did not play it that way.
Yeah, of course.
And I certainly did not. I've been aware of the Nuzlocke challenge just because of just this general gaming knowledge I've gained throughout the years. But it's never been anything that I even remotely wanted to participate in, because it just seems so horrible. Just backbreaking. You really need to know the games inside and out to stand a chance.
Yeah, because a lot of people think like, well, they just over level your Pokemon, but you can only over level so much, because if you get a Pokemon beyond a certain level without the appropriate gym badge, the Pokemon won't listen to you, and then like you can't go into a gym and be like, oh, I'll just have Pokemon perfect for that type. you might not run into that type. And I mean, you might run into like, oh, now I've got to fight Lieutenant Surge, and I don't, I don't have a rock Pokemon because instead of Geodude, I got Zubat. And so, you're really forced to have to work with what you've got.
And that may be challenging and fun to some people. That does not sound that does not sound fun to me at all.
Yeah, yeah. Did you want me to? I know we talked about a little bit about kind of where it started, and I did do a little bit of research because I wasn't even 100% sure, but I did kind of look it up and get a little bit of history.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, and I kind of thought it was a bigger thing than it was. Apparently, some kid just kind of came up with it. There's a college student named Nick Franco, and he decided to pull out his Pokemon game and thought it was a little too easy, so he decided to put those 2 restrictions on his game. And once he started playing it, he thought it was so neat that he decided to make a web comic detailing his story. And it was a little 14-page web comic. And in the web comic, one of the Pokemons he gets is a Seedot, and it evolves into Nuzleaf. And in one of the panels, he makes a joke where, and I don't even know the context of the joke, where he puts the head of John Locke from the television show Lost, which was popular then, on the Nuzleaf. And so fans dubbed it Nuzlocke, and fans essentially called it and dubbed it the Nuzlocke Challenge. And just from that web comic and people thinking, wow, this is a cool way to play through, other people start doing it and also publishing their web comics and story. And it just kind of caught on this like little viral movement of like doing this challenge and sharing your story because, it becomes like, dramatic and emotional when all of a sudden these characters die that you've named and you've had all this time and you can't revive. And so in the story, you're like, no, my Charmander, like they'll show it in some big emotional way. Or like the explanation I gave earlier where like, you get a Pokemon that's poisoned and now can you get him to the Pokemon Center in time to stop it from fainting? It adds this whole dramatic element to the story. And yeah, it really caught on. Like it's still today one of those things that, I mean, you type in Nuzlocke in YouTube and you'll find, live playthroughs and you'll find, people summarizing their playthroughs and histories of it. It's a pretty popular part of the gaming vernacular.
I'm looking at the webcomic right now.
Oh, it's pretty not good. The first one.
Yeah, it's a very, very basic.
Sure, yeah. Later on, people have made them into like really good stuff with like lore and developed characters and really good art. Like people have really like latched onto that concept and evolved it. But yeah, the original one was pretty not good.
So talking about your playthrough, and as someone that has played through all the gens, what are some of the quality of life improvements that are in later games that you were kind of maybe taken aback by not having in this first generation?
Oh man, so many TMs, and this one I knew wasn't going to be in there because I remember when they finally added this to the game. I was like, okay, they needed to have this forever. So TMs, technical machines, are what's used to teach Pokemon special moves. But in the first couple generations, you use a TM and it's done. So there's like 50 of them. And so if you're the type of guy like me, or even you, who wants to like maybe create a team, you may not want to use that because you want to keep that item because you like to have like a complete collection, or you might want to give 2 people, flamethrower, but you can't because those TMs are one-time use and you can never get them again. And so that was a huge thing. The HMs, which are the ones that are called hidden machines, which are used to like solve puzzles in the game, turn on lights, push on blocks. Back in the day, you had to have these Pokemon that were exclusively for that. So you usually have to walk around with some Pokemon that was wasted. He was just there to like have those moves for navigating the puzzles of the game. But in the future games, once you got to a certain point, you'd be able to do those things in certain ways without having to carry a Pokemon with that move. For instance, you could just summon a Pokemon to fly, summon a Pokemon to swim, and not necessarily have to have him there. Limited items, the fact that your backpack's not organized. If you want to catch a Pokemon, you have to like go through your list and be like, "Where's that Pokeball?" Whereas now it's like there's a Pokeball section, there's a healing section. So, I mean, yeah, there's so many life improvements that they've made over time to make the game just a little less irritating.
I should have asked this in the kind of personal history segment, but when it comes to objects like the leaf stone or the
Mm-hmm.
thunderstone and all that, how did you discover that you use those? And if you did evolve your Eevee, which of the three did you evolve it into?
Oh man, that's a hard one. Um, so yeah, like you're saying, there were evolutionary stones that would evolve certain Pokemon, and I believe even in the early ones they were limited. And yeah, you're talking about there's certain special evolutions. How I learned them, I'm sure through word of mouth or through a magazine, because the internet wasn't nearly what it was today. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I'm sure it was from friends or from magazines. Now, as far as the Eevee dilemma, that's a hard one. Back then, at least there was only three. Now there's nine. But I'd probably go with Fire, man, because you know you just always like Fire the best.
Yeah, have that Flareon on your team.
Sure, yeah. Now there's a fairy type and a glacier, an ice type, everything, almost everything.
Yeah, Glaceon. I did not know them very well. Uh, but I do know the original three. You had Vaporeon, the water, Jolteon, the electric, and Flareon, the fire.
Yeah, yeah.
And one of the interesting things that I like about Pokemon Yellow is that your rival takes the Pokemon that was originally going to be given to you, which was an Eevee.
Mm-hmm.
And then throughout the game, that Eevee will go through its evolution, as it's called,
Mm-hmm.
into one of those three. And so the team that your rival has is actually changed
It's
based
evolving.
on, say again?
Yeah, it's evolving.
Yeah, so your rival's Eevee will be one of those three, Vaporeon, Jolteon, or Flareon.
Mm-hmm.
And then whichever one it is, the team that they have is going to be slightly altered for your
Yeah,
final showdown with him.
exactly. Yeah, and that was kind of like with Red and Blue. He would usually choose. I believe he chose the opposite of whatever you chose. So you chose a Bulbasaur. He was going to choose Charmander because he's strong against grass. And then his team would adjust based on which of the three starters he had. But yeah, you could have a very different rival Pokemon set based on which path he went down.
So I'm going to talk about this more when I talk to Chris and Corey, but my encounter with the Elite Four, I was incredibly underleveled. I was not ready to face these guys. And I had to grind out on Victory Road in order to beat them.
Oh
And
yeah,
I was not enjoying the game near the end.
I can get that. Yeah, it required a lot of. I remember a lot of what I had to do back then was an experience share. You'd run with one really good, strong Pokemon, beat everybody, and then use experience share to like make some of the other ones really strong. But yeah, that they are pretty hard, mainly because you can't heal between them.
Yeah. And that experience share in the original game, this is for everyone out there. John, obviously, you know this. But to get EXP All, it is an item that you can only obtain after catching 50 Pokemon. And not even catching, you have to either have caught and evolved. So your Pokedex has to have the full Dex information for 50 separate Pokemon before Professor Oak's aid will give you that EXP All. And
Yeah.
then it takes a slot up in your limited item backpack.
Yes. I'm telling you, you when you said the quality of life stuff, you nailed it. Because playing this game, that's probably the biggest thing that I noticed that was different. Like all the little like annoying things. Where I was like, oh, I don't like that. Like, why? Like, I'm glad they changed that. But yeah, definitely. Inventory and sorting and all stuff definitely was a pain.
Well, there's another one that comes to mind. When I went to the safari,
Hmm.
even one of the people there will tell you, make sure that you have an empty box. And I
Hmm.
was like, I don't know what you're talking about because this is my first playthrough. So I
Yeah,
just started the safari, and the second
didn't have
Pokemon
it.
that I tried to catch, it was like, you don't have room. And I was like, what do you mean I don't have room?
Yeah, yeah. I remember that being a big thing too. I don't remember what generation they changed that, but essentially, you could store up to, I believe, 30 Pokemon in a box. So if you had 6 Pokemon on your team, which is the max, the next Pokemon you catch goes into your 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 chest, your digital chest. And after that 30, if you didn't manually go in there and change the settings so that you were now storing Pokemon in box 2, it would not automatically do it. Later games, they would just say, "Oh, you've done 30. All right, we'll put this one in the next box." But yeah, you could always get caught where all of a sudden you get this great Pokemon and it's like, "Oh, your box is full. Sorry, you can't catch this one."
What a pain.
Yeah. I
So,
definitely remember experiencing that.
so playing through Pokemon Yellow today, you said you didn't beat it, but you have definitely beat it in the past. Is this a game that you play regularly every couple of years, or is it just something that you just kind of have fond memories of, but just shy away from?
No, honestly, the first generation is not nearly my favorite one. I don't. This is the first time I've gone back and played it, probably since back then. I've gone back and played Gold and Silver because it's probably my favorite set, and I've also played the remake Heart Gold and Soul Silver. But this one's a little too old for me because going back and playing Red and Blue, like I said, the sprites look really bad. Like your Pokemon look weird and wonky. Uh, exactly what you mean. There's all kinds of weird issues. Yeah, it just doesn't feel full compared to today. You go play now, it's like all the maps look robust and decorated, and uh, I feel like there was a nice sweet spot in like the second and third generation. Now you're almost overloaded with too much stuff.
If someone were coming into Pokemon today, starting from scratch, where would you recommend that they start the franchise?
I love Gold and Silver, man. Gold and Silver is the best. Or I guess
Is that Gen 2? I'm not familiar
that
with.
is, yeah,
Okay.
that is Gen 2. Um, I guess are we if we take graphics out of it, because that's a big issue to me. And like, for instance, and we'll talk about this maybe in a future podcast. I'm a huge Metal Gear fan. I love Metal Gear Solid 1, but even I can admit it's a little hard to look at. And so, Gold and Silver, phenomenal game, but maybe you might want to stick with Heart Gold and Soul Silver to kind of get the improved graphics. I'd say that's kind of a great way to start is Heart Gold and Soul Silver.
So, does Heart Gold and Soul Silver or Gold and Silver, do they have all of the Pokemon from Gen 1 as well as the new ones?
Yes, they
Again, I
have.
don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Each generation, generally speaking, as far as the main series, has all the previous ones. They still have their missing ones. You never have any game that you can get a complete Pokedex without trading. You're always going to have like, oh, this one doesn't have Tauros, this one doesn't have Growlithe, this one doesn't have. You know what I mean? And so you have to figure out ways to trade to get every Pokemon. But you know, um, Gold and Silver might have 220 of the 251 Pokemon it's supposed to have.
Which is still a ton of Pokemon. That's a lot to do.
Yeah, I think now we're clocking in somewhere about 1,100 of them. I don't know, so it's
I know
pretty.
it's over 1,000 at least.
Yeah, and then like I was saying, they've added so many side evolutions and extra like they have regional Pokemon, so it's like this is a Meowth, but if you catch him in this area, he's got thicker fur and longer teeth, and you know, he had like all kinds of stuff. And then they added in Generation 2, they added baby Pokemon, where that's where you get your famous Pichu. You had like the Pokemon that implied that they were the starting form, but then all of a sudden in Gen 2, they were like, nope, they all have children that are weaker than them and cuter than them that come before.
Well, I might go ahead and try out Heart Gold and Soul Silver later on, but from my experience playing through Pokemon Yellow, I I don't have nostalgia for this game, and
No, I
so this was
understand.
pretty rough. I did manage to beat it, and I clocked in at how long did it take me? I wrote it down. It took me around 35 hours to beat this game,
Well, yeah, that sounds about right.
which
That does sound about right.
I didn't use the internet and look anything up specifically until after I had beaten the game, because I did go back and find Mewtwo, but I did not Google any of the
Mhm.
um you know hints or tips or tricks. All I did was just asked people that were playing the game with me, or people that are on our Discord
Sure.
channel, that, kind of, because I wanted to kind of capture that playground feel of
Mhm.
asking people that were playing the game. But
Sure, yeah.
I mean, it's been 25 years, so they had all the answers for me.
Did you get the legendary three birds?
So during my playthrough, I found two of them. I found Zapdos and Articuno, because I
Yeah.
found the power plant
Yeah.
accidentally,
Hmm.
and I saw, what's the third one? Moltres, the flame
Moltres,
one.
yeah. They're named after the the
Uno
Spanish
dos tres.
1, 2, 3. Yeah.
So I found, or excuse me, I saw Moltres in, he's in Victory Road, but I didn't know how to get to him. So I was like, you know what? I'm near the end of the game. I'm just gonna wrap this up. And
Sure.
then that's when the Elite Four put the smackdown on me, and I had to go back in and just grind out Golbats and Geodudes and
Sure.
uh Machamps. Is it Machamp or Machoke? The second
Machoke is the second form. Yeah.
Machoke. Okay, Machamp is the final evolution then.
Yeah. You got to trade for that one.
What an amazing idea it is to just kind of trade. And I don't believe that the games initially set out to kind of screw people over and force them to buy two different versions of the exact same game. I genuinely believe that that was done to encourage people to get together and talk about the
Sure.
game more. But
Maybe.
at least for today, I don't think that they need to do the two concept or two different games anymore.
Yeah. I see that. Except they like to separate the legendaries now. They almost always, I feel like in every Pokemon game, there's always a trio of like under legendaries. You know, that we'll call those like, they're not always like the true big ones. Then you got your two, you usually have a pair of legendaries that are like the cover art. Then you always have like one kind of like mythical one, like a cutesy little, that's your Mew, your
Like Celebi.
Celebi and things like that. And so I think a lot of people really love, like, even for me, like, Pokemon isn't about playing the storyline. Like, in fact, that's kind of a chore. If I pick up the new Pokemon game, I'm like, oh man, I'm not like, oh man, can't wait to beat these 8 gym leaders and beat the Elite Four. No, I'm like, I want to check out the new end game stuff, because the end game stuff is fun. Like going into the really hard areas and finding the cool legendary Pokemon and the cool like extra side quests. And then the other thing is, once you get to the point where you're a real Pokemon fan and like you start understanding the systems, anybody who like really knows Pokemon knows that there's a huge amount of depth to fighting other people, because there's all kinds of hidden elements in how you evolve a Pokemon, to the point where if you caught a Pikachu and I caught a Pikachu, I could train him in a way where at a level 100, he would be eons better than your Pikachu. And so you've got to like be able to like understand these systems and try to not only, you may spend 10 hours making that perfect Pikachu, and then also picking the perfect set of moves, and then picking the perfect set of 6 Pokemon that work with each other and cover all the bases of different elemental differences and how they can work with each other. Like forming an effective team for like competitively fighting is like a whole game in itself.
like a meta game.
Yeah.
Well, John, we're turning up on about the hour mark right here. So I think that we're going to wrap this up. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time and playing this game, and especially for doing the Nuzlocke challenge and trying to add some more depth to the game that we were not going to be doing on our normal playthroughs.
I'm a sadist.
You'd have to be to do something like that, because I've read through these rules and that is just too intense for me, especially a beginner to the series.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, John, unless there's anything else you want to say, we're just going to go ahead and wrap this up.
All right. Yeah. No, that sounds great. I look forward to seeing how this all ends out.
Yeah, and we will definitely have you back on for that Metal Gear episode that we're going to do later on this year.
Yes. Gotta love Metal Gear.
All right, everybody. So I hope you enjoyed this little side quest of ours, this little 0.5 that we did. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next episode.